Dr. Rivera, you're done here. Dr. Patricia Weston's voice cut through the morning rounds like a scalpel. Sharp. Loud. Designed to be heard by every resident, nurse, and attending physician crowded into the surgical wing corridor. I want your OR credentials, your pager, and your ID badge. You have until end of shift to clear out your locker. The silence that followed was the kind that makes your ears ring. 23 people, mid-conversation about patient charts just seconds ago, now frozen like someone had paused a movie. A second-year resident's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Even Mrs. Patterson in room 347, 3 doors down, probably heard it through her morphine haze. My name is Dr. James Rivera, thoracic surgeon. Or I was, until about 30 seconds ago. And in that moment, standing in the middle of the floor where I'd performed over 400 successful surgeries, where I'd trained half these residents, where I'd once coded a patient back to life using nothing but my hands and sheer determination, I did something that clearly surprised Dr. Weston. I nodded. Understood. May I ask what grounds I'm being terminated on? Weston smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile a shark gives right before it bites. You'll receive the formal documentation from HR. But let's be honest, James. She stepped closer, voice dropping just low enough to seem confidential while remaining perfectly audible to everyone watching. Your surgical outcomes have been declining. Patient complaints are up. The board feels it's time for fresh perspective. I looked at her for a long moment. Fresh perspective. That was interesting. Considering my surgical success rate was 97.4%. Considering I'd published 3 groundbreaking papers on minimally invasive cardiac procedures in the last 18 months. Considering just last week, a patient hugged me in the parking lot and cried because I'd given her father 5 more years of life. All right, I said. Calm. Controlled. The way my father taught me. I'll have everything cleared out by 7. Weston's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. She'd expected anger. Maybe tears. Definitely some kind of scene. That's what she wanted, actually. A reason to call security. A dramatic exit to cement her authority in front of the staff. Instead, I walked past her toward the staff lounge. Behind me, I heard the whispers start. Low, urgent, shocked. Nobody stopped me. Not even Dr. Chen, who I'd mentored through his residency. Not even Nurse Matthews, who I'd helped get her daughter into nursing school. That was the moment I understood how deep Weston's poison had spread. But what Weston didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just some surgeon she could erase from the schedule. I was the reason this entire wing existed. And tomorrow morning, she was going to learn exactly what happens when you try to burn down a building while the owner's still inside. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the office building 2 miles from St. Catherine's Hospital. The one with my name on the 7th floor directory. Though not as Dr. James Rivera, just as J. Rivera, LLP. The law office I'd maintained since my father died 4 years ago. The office where I'd spent 18 months quietly documenting every decision Patricia Weston had made since becoming chief of surgery. See, what most people at St. Catherine's didn't know was that I wasn't just a surgeon. I was Victor Rivera's son. And Victor Rivera wasn't just the janitor who'd mopped those floors for 38 years. He was the man who'd taken a settlement from a malpractice case back in 1989, a case where the hospital had nearly destroyed his career, and instead of spending that money, he'd invested every single dollar into the hospital's expansion fund during their bankruptcy crisis of 1991. When the hospital restructured and became St. Catherine's Medical Center in 1995, my father had leveraged that investment into something extraordinary. He'd secured a board position. Not publicly. Not with his name on any letterhead. But through a medical trust corporation he'd established with the help of a sharp lawyer who believed in second chances. The Victor Rivera Memorial Trust owned 41% of St. Catherine's voting shares. And when my father died of pancreatic cancer in my arms 4 years ago, guess who inherited that trust? I pulled the files from the cabinet. 18 months of documented decisions. Weston had been brought in by 3 board members who'd never bothered to check the trust documentation. They saw V. Rivera Memorial Trust and assumed it was some distant charitable foundation. They had no idea the beneficial owner was sitting in OR 7, stitching up coronary bypasses. But I'd been watching. Weston's efficiency improvements that cut nursing staff by 30%. Her deal with Pharmacare Solutions that switched our cardiac medications to cheaper alternatives with higher complication rates. The restructuring that eliminated our charity care program. The one that provided free surgeries to uninsured patients. My father's program. The reason he'd invested in this hospital in the first place. I documented all of it. Every email, every board memo, every patient complaint that mysteriously disappeared from official records. and I'd watched her forge my signature on 3 separate patient care modification forms. Forms that would have reduced post-operative monitoring to save costs. Forms that would have gotten patients killed. I opened my laptop and pulled up the hospital's internal server. My administrative access, the access Weston thought she'd revoked, was actually rooted in my position as trust executor. I watched in real time as she filed my termination paperwork. Cause, performance inadequacy and patient care concerns. Effective, immediate. Severance, none due to termination for cause. Clever. Termination for cause meant no appeal process. No severance dispute, just gone. I smiled and opened the legal folder I'd prepared 3 months ago, when I realized where this was heading. The folder was titled simply, Emergency Shareholder Action, Article 7.3, Article Sept. 3 of the St. Catherine's Medical Center Operating Agreement. The agreement my father had negotiated in 1995 contained a very specific clause. In the event of actions that substantially threaten patient care or hospital mission, any shareholder holding more than 35% could trigger an emergency review and temporary suspension of executive authority pending board investigation. I hit send on 5 emails. 1 to my attorney. 1 to Dr. Harold Kim, the one board member who'd been suspicious of Weston from the start. And 3 to patients whose family members had died in the last 6 months due to Weston's cost-cutting measures. Patients whose families I'd been quietly helping prepare wrongful death consultations. By midnight, the legal motions were filed. By 6 a.m., they'd be served. And by the time Weston walked through those doors tomorrow morning with her expensive latte and her self-satisfied smirk, her keycard wasn't going to work. At 7:15 a.m., I walked through the main entrance of St. Catherine's Hospital in a suit I hadn't worn since my father's funeral. Charcoal gray, 3-piece, the one he'd bought me when I graduated from medical school. Always look like you belong in the room you're trying to enter, he'd told me. Even if that room is a boardroom full of people who think you're just the janitor's kid. The lobby was bustling. Early shift change, visitors arriving, the normal controlled chaos of a major hospital waking up. I walked past the security desk with a nod. Past the volunteer station, straight to the executive elevators. That's where I saw her. Dr. Patricia Weston, stepping out of her Mercedes in the executive parking lot, visible through the glass walls. Designer bag in one hand, phone in the other, laughing at something. She looked like someone who'd just won a particularly satisfying victory. She saw me through the glass. Blinked. Paused mid-laugh. I watched her face cycle through confusion, annoyance, and then something that might have been concern as she noticed the suit. She walked faster. Pushed through the doors right as I pressed the elevator button. Dr. Rivera, she said, and I could hear the forced authority in her voice. I thought I made myself clear yesterday. You're no longer employed here. I'll have to call security if... Dr. Weston, the voice came from behind her. Dr. Harold Kim, St. Catherine's longest-serving board member and former chief of cardiology, emerged from the hallway with 2 people I recognized immediately. Sarah Chen from Hospital Legal and Marcus Washington, head of hospital security. You'll need to surrender your hospital credentials, your executive access card, and any hospital-issued devices. Effective immediately, your position as chief of surgery is suspended pending emergency board review. The color drained from Weston's face. Literally drained, like someone had pulled a plug. On what grounds? Her voice had lost all its smoothness. Now it was just sharp edges and panic. Harold nodded toward me. Dr. Rivera, acting as executor of the Victor Rivera Memorial Trust and majority shareholder of this medical center, has invoked Article 7.3. Emergency suspension of executive authority due to substantial threat to patient care and hospital mission. We've reviewed the documentation. It's extensive. I stepped into the elevator. Pressed the button for the 6th floor. Executive suite. The floor I hadn't entered since my father's last board meeting, the one he'd attended in a wheelchair 3 weeks before he died. Weston tried to follow me into the elevator. This is insane. You can't just... Marcus Washington, all 6'4" of him, gently blocked the door. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us to surrender your credentials. The last thing I saw as the doors closed was Weston's face, finally understanding that something had gone very, very wrong with her careful plan. The executive suite was exactly as I remembered it. Glass walls overlooking the city. Polished mahogany. The kind of space designed to make you feel small unless you belong there. I walked past my father's old office, now Weston's, and headed to the boardroom. Inside, Dr. Marcus Cole was waiting. The hospital's CFO, the man who'd been Weston's biggest supporter. The man who'd signed off on every cost-cutting measure, every dangerous policy change. He stood when I entered, but there was no handshake offered. Dr. Rivera? He said carefully. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Dr. Weston's initiatives have saved this hospital millions in operational costs. Surely we can discuss? I set my briefcase on the table. Opened it. Inside were 3 folders. I slid the first one across the mahogany surface toward him. That's the documentation of 32 patient deaths in the last 18 months, I said. My voice was level. Professional. The voice I used when delivering bad news to families, all of them following implementation of Dr. Weston's efficiency protocols. The mortality rate in cardiac surgery has increased by 41%. Post-operative infections are up 63%. Patient satisfaction scores have dropped from 92% to 67%. Marcus opened the folder. I watched his face as he scanned the first page. Then the second. The color started rising in his neck. These patients, I continued, had families. 3 of those families are filing wrongful death suits as of this morning. Those suits name Dr. Weston, yourself, and the hospital board for negligent implementation of cost-cutting measures that directly resulted in patient deaths. I slid the second folder across. That's the documentation of Dr. Weston forging my signature on patient care modification forms. 3 separate occasions. Each one a felony, each one a violation of medical ethics that will result in immediate license suspension and likely criminal charges. Marcus's hands were shaking now. Just slightly, but I saw it. The third folder stayed in front of me. I rested my hand on it. And this, I said quietly, is something I really didn't want to open. But you've left me no choice. I flipped it open so he could see the first page. It was an email. Dated August 2021. From Marcus Cole to Patricia Weston, before she'd even been hired at St. Catherine's. The email detailed a plan. How Weston would come in as chief of surgery. How she'd systematically marginalize the old guard physicians, the ones loyal to the hospital's mission rather than its profit margins. How they'd restructure the hospital's charity care program, funneling those funds into executive compensation and shareholder dividends for the board members who'd supported the plan. And there, in black and white, was the section about me. Rivera is a problem. Too popular with staff, too invested in his father's legacy programs. Recommend creating documented performance issues to justify termination. Once he's gone, we can restructure thoracic entirely. Marcus sat down heavily. Where did you get that? You send it through the hospital email system, I said. The hospital email system that's monitored and archived by IT security. The hospital whose IT director, Michael Torres, was hired by my father 23 years ago. Michael takes patient care very seriously. When he noticed unusual mortality rates correlating with policy changes, he started paying attention to certain email accounts. I closed the folder. Dr. Cole, you have 2 options. You can resign immediately, effective today, with a signed agreement to cooperate fully with the board's investigation into Dr. Weston's tenure. Or you can fight this, and every document in this folder becomes part of public court record when the wrongful death suits proceed to trial. The door opened. Harold Kim stepped in, along with 2 other board members I recognized. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, head of emergency medicine, and Father Michael Stevens, the hospital's chaplain and community board representative. Mr. Cole, Harold said formally, we're convening an emergency session in 15 minutes. You're welcome to have legal counsel present. Marcus looked at me. Really looked at me. Your father, he said slowly, he was just the janitor. How did? My father, I interrupted, and for the first time, I let the emotion into my voice, mopped these floors for 38 years while putting himself through night school. He became a nurse. Then a surgical tech. Then he witnessed a malpractice case that nearly destroyed an innocent doctor's career because the hospital covered up a equipment malfunction to save money. He took his settlement and invested every penny into saving this hospital from bankruptcy because he believed in what it could be, not what it was. What it could be? I stood up. He believed in a hospital that treated everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. He believed in a hospital where janitors' kids could become doctors, where patient care mattered more than profit margins. He built that, and you tried to dismantle it. I walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Marcus? My father wasn't just the janitor. By the time he died, he was the hospital's largest individual shareholder. He just never needed anyone to know that. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was right. The boardroom was silent except for my footsteps as I walked out. The emergency board session lasted 4 hours. I sat in my father's old chair, the one at the head of the table with the worn leather armrest where he used to tap his fingers when he was thinking. Harold Kim presented the documentation. Sarah Chen from legal outlined the liability exposure. Dr. Okonkwo presented patient care data that made 3 board members visibly pale. Patricia Weston was given an opportunity to respond. She tried. Claimed the documentation was falsified. Claimed I had a personal vendetta. Claimed the mortality statistics were coincidental. Then I played the recording, the one from the Pharmacare Solutions meeting, where Weston had been caught on the hospital's conference room recording system discussing kickback arrangements for switching cardiac medications. 5% of all pharmaceutical cost savings paid into a consulting company that happened to be registered to her husband. She stopped talking after that. The vote was unanimous. Patricia Weston, terminated for cause. Marcus Cole, resigned pending investigation. And then Harold turned to me. Dr. Rivera. The board would like to formally offer you the position of Chief of Surgery, effective immediately. I shook my head. No. That's not what this was about. The room went quiet. Harold frowned. James, you've just proven you have the leadership. I'm a surgeon, I said. A good one. That's where I belong. In the OR? With patients. What this hospital needs is someone who understands both medicine and administration. Someone who's been watching this disaster unfold and documenting everything. Not because they wanted power, but because they care about patient care. I turned to Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. The board should offer the position to Dr. Okonkwo. She runs the busiest emergency department in the city with consistent high patient satisfaction scores, low mortality rates, and she's been fighting Weston's policies since day one. She just never had the leverage to stop them. Sarah stared at me. James, you fought for your patients, I said. Even when it cost you professionally. That's what a chief of surgery should do. The board voted again, this time offering the position to Sarah. She accepted, but only on the condition that I agreed to serve on the Medical Ethics Board and the Patient Care Oversight Committee. I agreed. But I had one more condition. The Victor Rivera Memorial Fund, I said, will be restructured to provide full medical school scholarships for children of hospital staff. Janitors, cafeteria workers, security guards, nurses, anyone who works at St. Catherine's and has a child who wants to pursue medicine or healthcare. Full tuition, 4 years. My father believed anyone who wanted to heal people should have that chance, regardless of where they started. Father Stevens actually wiped his eyes. Victor would be proud, son. I walked out of that boardroom at 4:30 in the afternoon, exhausted, emotionally drained, but feeling something I hadn't felt in 18 months. Like I could breathe, I went down to the surgical floor. My locker was still there, untouched since yesterday. I opened it and saw the photo I'd taped inside 7 years ago. My father in his janitorial uniform, standing in front of the new cardiac wing on opening day. He was smiling. That quiet, proud smile he had when something good happened that nobody knew he'd made possible. We cleaned house, Dad, I said quietly to the photo. The way you taught me. Document everything. Stay calm. And when they think you're down, that's when you show them who you really are. I heard footsteps behind me. Dr. Chen, the resident I'd mentored. He looked nervous. Dr. Rivera, I just wanted to say. Yesterday, when Dr. Weston fired you, I should have said something. I should have stood up for you. I'm sorry. I looked at him. He was young. 28 maybe. Right where I'd been when I started my surgical residency. Full of idealism that hadn't been crushed yet. You know what my father told me when I started medical school? I asked. He said, James, there will be times when standing up means losing everything. Your job, your reputation, your future. You need to know that before you make that choice. Because once you make it, you can't unmake it. I closed my locker. You weren't ready to make that choice yesterday. That's okay. But now you know what it looks like when someone does. So next time, when you see something wrong, when you see someone being hurt, you'll remember this moment. And maybe you'll be ready. Chen nodded slowly. What you did today. That was incredible. What I did today, I corrected him, was protect patients. That's the job. Everything else is just paperwork. I went home that night to my apartment. Small place, nothing fancy. I'd never needed fancy. I made dinner, the way my father taught me. Arroz con pollo. His recipe. The one he'd learned from his mother. While it was cooking, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. My hand hesitated over it, remembering the threats Weston had made in whispers. The warnings that this wasn't over. I opened it. Dr. Rivera, this is Grace Patterson. You performed emergency surgery on my mother, Helen Patterson, 3 years ago. You saved her life when 2 other doctors said there was nothing they could do. I just saw the news about you becoming the Medical Ethics Board chair at St. Catherine's. I wanted you to know that there are thousands of us out here. Patients you saved, families you helped. People who know what kind of doctor you are. What kind of person you are. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for being your father's son. I sat down heavily on my couch. Read the message 3 more times. Then I did something I hadn't done since my father's funeral. I cried. Not from sadness. From relief. From the weight of 18 months of carrying evidence, of watching patients suffer, of knowing what needed to be done but having to wait for the right moment. All of it finally released. The next morning, I was back in OR 7 at 6 a.m., scrubbing in for a coronary bypass. The patient was a 54-year-old construction worker named David Martinez. Uninsured. The surgery would have cost him $80,000 under Weston's protocols. Under the restructured charity care program we'd reinstated the night before, it cost him nothing. I made the first incision at 6:43 a.m. Exactly the way my father had taught me to approach every task. Carefully. Precisely. With absolute focus on the work in front of me, not the politics behind me. 3 weeks later, Sarah Okonkwo called a hospital-wide meeting. Every department, every shift, everyone who could be spared from patient care. The auditorium was packed. Sarah stood at the podium. 3 weeks ago, this hospital was heading toward a crisis. Patient care was suffering. Our mission was being compromised. Today, I want to announce several changes. She outlined the new policies. Restored nursing ratios. Reinstated the charity care program. New oversight on pharmaceutical contracts. A patient advocacy board with real authority. Then she said something that made my throat tight. We're also dedicating the new medical education center in honor of someone many of you knew, but perhaps didn't know as well as you thought. Victor Rivera worked at St. Catherine's for 38 years. Many of you remember him as a janitor. What you might not know is that Victor put himself through nursing school while working nights. He became a surgical tech. And when this hospital faced bankruptcy in 1991, he invested everything he had to keep these doors open. A photo appeared on the screen behind her. My father, young, in his janitorial uniform, holding a mop. Next to it, another photo. My father in a suit, signing documents at a board meeting that nobody knew he attended. Victor Rivera believed that healthcare was a calling, not a business. That hospitals existed to serve patients, not profit margins. That anyone, regardless of where they started, should have the opportunity to heal others. The Victor Rivera Medical Education Center will honor that belief. Starting next year, we will provide full scholarships for medical school, nursing programs, and healthcare administration to children of St. Catherine's employees. The applause was immediate, thunderous. I stood in the back of the auditorium, trying to stay unnoticed, but Dr. Chen spotted me. Then Nurse Matthews. Then others. And suddenly the applause shifted. People were looking at me. Some were crying. An older woman in a cafeteria uniform pushed through the crowd. I recognized her. Mrs. Torres. She'd worked in the hospital cafeteria for 26 years. Her daughter was a sophomore in college, pre-med, drowning in student loans. She grabbed my hand. Your father used to eat lunch with us, she said, voice shaking. In the cafeteria. Every day. He'd ask about our families. Our kids. He knew my daughter wanted to be a doctor. He told me, one day, Mrs. Torres, this hospital will help kids like yours. You'll see. She was crying now. He kept his promise. Even after he was gone. Through you, I couldn't speak. Could only nod. That night, I went to the cemetery. My father's grave was simple. Just his name, his dates, and a line he'd chosen himself. He healed by helping others heal. I sat on the grass next to the headstone. We did it, Dad. St. Catherine's is back to being what you wanted it to be. A place where patient care comes first. Where anyone can get help. Regardless of whether they can pay. Where kids like me, kids whose parents clean floors and serve food, can dream of becoming doctors. The sun was setting. Orange light cutting through the trees. I could almost hear his voice. Quiet. Steady. The way he always was. You taught me something important, I said to the stone. You taught me that real power isn't about having a title or making noise. It's about knowing who you are, what you stand for, and being willing to do the hard work nobody sees. You mopped floors while building an empire. You stayed quiet while changing lives. You never needed credit because you knew the work mattered more than recognition. I stood up, brushed the grass off my pants. I'm going to keep doing the work, Dad. The surgeries, the teaching, the fighting for patients when someone tries to turn them into profit centers. And I'm going to do it the way you taught me. Quietly, consistently, with the understanding that the people who matter will see the truth, and the people who don't matter will eventually see it too, usually right before they lose everything. I walked back to my car. Tomorrow I had 3 surgeries scheduled. Next week, I had a medical ethics board meeting where we'd review pharmaceutical contracts. Next month, I was teaching a seminar for first-year residents on patient advocacy. My phone buzzed. Another message. This one from Sarah Okonkwo. Board meeting next week. Patricia Weston's medical license was suspended pending criminal investigation. Marcus Cole is cooperating with authorities. 4 more executives have resigned. We're building something good here, James. Your father would be proud. I typed back. He already was. That's why he did what he did. I drove home through the city. Past the hospital where my father had mopped floors and dreamed of better things. Past the medical school where I'd studied while he worked double shifts to pay my tuition, never mentioning the trust fund that could have covered it 10 times over. Past the small house where he'd raised me alone after my mother died, teaching me that who you are isn't determined by where you start, but by what you choose to do with the opportunities you're given. And I thought about Patricia Weston. About how she'd looked at me and seen just another surgeon she could erase. How she'd never bothered to ask why a thoracic surgeon was so invested in a charity care program. Why I cared so much about hospital policies that didn't directly affect my department. Why I stayed quiet when she insulted me in front of my colleagues. She'd made the classic mistake. She'd assumed silence meant weakness. She'd confused patience with powerlessness. She'd thought that because I didn't fight back immediately, I wasn't capable of fighting at all. But my father taught me something she never learned. Sometimes the strongest move is the one nobody sees coming. Sometimes the real power is in watching your opponent make every mistake they're capable of making, documenting each one, and then, when they think they've won, showing them exactly how wrong they were. Not for revenge. Not for satisfaction. But because some things are worth fighting for. Patient care, integrity. The belief that a hospital should heal people, not exploit them. The promise that anyone who wants to dedicate their life to helping others should have that chance, regardless of whether their parent is a CEO or a janitor. I pulled into my parking spot, turned off the engine, sat in the quiet darkness for a moment. Tomorrow I'd wake up at 5 a.m. I'd scrub in. I'd hold someone's beating heart in my hands and repair it. I'd teach a resident how to tie surgical knots that would save lives. I'd fight boring battles over policy and procedure that most people would never know happened. And I'd do it all quietly. The way my father taught me. Because the work matters more than the recognition. The patients matter more than the politics. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what Patricia Weston never expected. Be exactly who you are. Do exactly what's right. And trust that the truth, when it finally comes out, will speak louder than anything else. My father knew that. He lived it for 38 years, mopping floors while moving mountains. And now it was my turn to carry it forward. One surgery at a time. One patient at a time. One quiet, consistent, powerful choice at a time. The work was just beginning.